I think I always really liked drawing. I think I thought drawing was a way of escaping when I was a kid, that you could just make up your own world, or you could just invent things how you wanted. And it was really pleasurable. And I think because I always wanted to draw, it just seemed natural then that I would go to art school. I think I knew I wanted to be an artist without really knowing what an artist really was. But I think it was just ingrained, a kind of want to make things. But I use a range of different materials and different media. So I make paintings on silk, I make drawings, I make three-dimensional forms, and I make animation and sound. But they all come out of the same language, which is a kind of very drawn language. But those different media are very different ways of exploring ideas. So they offer different ways of conveying thought. In general, the work is about what the personal human experience is, what it's like to be a human being alive at this point in time, and how we all have a kind of inner narrative, which is our personal thoughts and feelings that kind of drive our way of understanding the world. But that is cast into a much wider political context, or a context which we all share, which is to do with how structures are set up for us to live within, political structures, or just kind of everyday structures of how we go about doing things, or things like technology, or our relationships to nature. And also, I suppose in this exhibition, more like our relationship to a kind of broader history of humans. So it's a way of kind of moving from the very interior to the very exterior, and thinking about things that are quite universal, but also that they're acutely personal. So it's really trying to articulate that thing that's just in our minds, the sort of thoughts in our head, which incorporate very, very tiny, in a way, intimate things, and very, very expansive, big things that affect all of us. The premise of the show is really about looking at our period of time, our kind of strange period of time, and thinking about how we're involved in a kind of moment of collapse where systems are breaking down. We're in a situation that we've never been in before, and it's putting pressure on just the way we've lived. We've thought about the way we've lived, but it's never been under so much extreme pressure to really kind of notice how we go about living and doing things. And it's thinking about this moment of a kind of crash where everything collapses. And then after the crash, the people that survive, wondering how to proceed and how they can survive and how their lives should be constructed and what is the way they want to be in the future. And I think these are all questions that we're all asking. There's a group of women depicted in the work, and the idea of them is that they're at once me, they're representations of me walking through my thoughts, but they're also a group of women who are keeners, which is a group of professional mourners, and keening is a Celtic tradition. And I was really interested in the fact that there used to be a tradition of women going to houses where someone has died and helping the family to express their grief and helping that family to access their emotional space. And also their role was to transport the soul of the human that had died from the earth to another realm. So it's this idea of like helping move from one place to another. So really the exhibition unravels a kind of very open, non-linear narrative about this group of women and how they're helping us grieve the life we might have had before, or the fact that systems have crashed and we're the survivors and we're sort of will be grieving in this period of time. And they're sort of helping us move from one position to another, which is like this hopeful sort of future position. So there's a very long painted silk hanging, and it's the idea of a quite epic landscape, which is informed by thinking about landscapes in Scotland. But it's also a psychological landscape, so it's like an interior as well, an interior space that one might explore in thought. And these women are moving through that space and they're encountering elements from different eras. So they encounter Celtic birds, which are extraordinary because they're so unbird-like in the way they're drawn. So they're encountering the way that previous cultures have configured truth and fact. And they're also encountering just the sort of wonderful qualities of nature and recognizing themselves as a part of this process of living and dying and being in nature. And there's an animation of cut-out drawings, which is keening songs. So the women, each of the women has a different song, and they explore a different kind of reverie of grief. And then there are some three-dimensional works which are conceived as drawings in 3 dimensions. So they operate the way that a drawing does on a piece of paper, but they're physically present. And they're quite imaginary things. And I quite like the fact that 3-dimensional physical work can represent ideas which are quite intangible. So they sort of have that property, hopefully. When I came to Dundee and I was doing some research, and I was quite open-minded about what I might include in the exhibition, what might provoke me, I went to the McManus and I saw this incredible John Duncan painting, which is it's a Celtic revival painting, and it's of a kind of magical procession, which has sort of figures, like mythical figures, fairy figures, I think a knight on horseback. And there are depictions of Celtic objects which are archaeological finds, that are in the McManus, I think, that are then inserted in the painting to show how they would have been used. So they're sort of treated as living things. So the painting itself revives this idea of a kind of ancient culture. And for some reason, it really struck a chord with me. There was something about that premise of kind of reconstructing something that you don't really know, you can't really know. And also the other thing that struck me in the McManus was a Pictish carving of this kind of spherical stone, that apparently there are lots of these stones all over the landscape and nobody knows what they're for. And I was really curious about the Picts and how nobody knows anything of their culture. We know they existed, but we don't know much about them. So that made me think about our own culture and how much anyone would know of us in the future, and how we might be represented, and how some of the things that seem really factual and like realism to us might look completely incomprehensible to future generations. So then I thought, I really want to somehow make use of the idea of the landscape as a kind of container, like a psychic container, where it contains all of these histories. It contains like mythic histories, like these kind of myths about how the landscape was formed, or, different eras of people living in the space, and how it could be that the landscape has sort of seen everything, but has been a sort of just present witness, maybe. to all of that humanity. And that, for me, connected with this idea of our time, moving to the future, what the past was, and these women that are sort of almost helping us kind of move through time. That sort of made sense to me. The work is a combination always of different elements. There's not one dominant thing. So there are drawn images, but I might draw a text. And it's because different modes convey thoughts differently. So sometimes it only works as a text, and sometimes it only works as an image. But in combination, they don't serve one another, but they can somehow inform across a broad number of elements. And the text in this exhibition is all text that I've written myself, and it is the sort of train of thought, if you like, while I'm making. So if I'm making a large painted piece, I know there will be text, and I kind of know what it's about, but as I'm making, then the words become sort of crystallized in my mind, and then I paint them onto the work. But it all happens sort of in the same space where things are being invented. But the writing is really informed by thinking about how to articulate in quite a poetic way, so it's not too direct, but it does ask questions a lot, and usually they're questions I'm asking myself. But it sort of says, what would it be like if we thought this? Or, it's quite speculative. It's like a kind of thought experiment, really. That's how it operates. And I read quite a lot, so I'm obviously sort of filtering through different thoughts that come from other influences too, but most of the time it's very directly what's going on in my head, just trying to capture my thinking. Lockdown for everyone is a kind of change about in terms of how we can do anything or get anything done. And curiously for me, it allowed me to teach myself to make animation. So animation is a totally new, this year, a new aspect of the work, and it comes out of the drawing. But I think of it as being able to go into the world of my drawing and walk around in there. So you, as a viewer, you get a kind of bigger sort of aperture into that world. But really, the making of animation was sort of forced by a situation at the beginning of lockdown, the first lockdown, where I couldn't get to my studio, so I was working from home. And it's really interesting how that sort of adapting to the situation, in my case, it sort of brought out something that I'm really happy as a development in the work. I'm really happy that that's been an extension that then I can show here.